Hello and welcome to the Angling Flaneurs. Today we're going to be looking at Cannon Street, one of those iconic streets that link the eastern side of the City of London to its western side. Cannon Street starts at St Paul's Churchyard outside the cathedral, and running east it meets Queen Victoria Street in Mansion House, passing Cannon Street Station and finally ending up close to the monument. In the late 19th century, Cannon Street was occupied by large wholesale warehouses, especially for cotton goods and other fabrics, but it has a very different makeup today. The area around Cannon Street was initially the place of residence for candle makers, and in 1190 the place was known as Candlebright Street, or something close to that. And it's also where in 2004 the singer Mark Ullman from Soft Cell suffered a near fatal crash, but happily he's recovered. So there's some bits and pieces about Cannon Street. I've also dropped in a Google Map image of the street and its surrounding areas, which I try to do for most of my vlogs, but in most cases I completely forget. I must also make mention that we'll be exploring some of its side streets, and that's where we are now, Martin Lane. And now we can see the site of the former St Martin Auger Church. Its name is said to derive from one Ord Garris, a Dane who donated the church to the canons of St Paul's. The church was mostly destroyed in the Great Fire of London 1666, but the tower and part of the nave were left standing. At this point we're standing less than 200 yards away from where the Fire of London would have started, at Pudding Lane, just east of today's monument. After the Great Fire, the remains of the church were restored and used by French Protestants until 1820. We're taking a walk around what I presume would have been the churchyard. It looks very pleasant, but I must apologise, there's nothing worse than an artificial lawn. But there may be a reason for it. I follow an Instagram group called SHIT Lawns. They really are repulsive and awful for the environment. Maybe they should put a sign up saying nothing lives in this lawn. But you don't want to listen to this video and hear some old git whinging on about plastic lawns. So let's get back to the facts. We're looking at the old rectory now at 29 Martin Lane, and it's an imposing Grade 2 listed building with the impressive bell tower feature. We've now made our way back onto Cannon Street, and this is where really I should have started the vlog. And ironically at this point we're nearer to Bank Station than we are to Cannon Street Station. Bank Station seems to be ever expanding. And of course any London vlog cannot be complete without a red bus or several red buses coming past as you're filming, or someone driving a white van. We've now made our way over the road to the Church of St Mary Abchurch. Now this was dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and it's first mentioned around 1198 and 1199. The medieval church was destroyed in the Great Fire of London and replaced by the present building. The church was rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren, or one of his disciples, between 1681 and 1686 after the Great Fire of London. Well, who else would have done it? parish was united with that of the nearby church of St. Lawrence Pountney. When you view the church from the outside, it doesn't look anything too special. Not that I'm an expert in this or really know what I'm talking about, but once you come inside, you're blown away by its splendour. We viewed many of the fine internal features in the church from the organ, but this really is the masterpiece. The ceiling of the church takes the form of a dished cupola pierced by 4 elliptical openings which become almost circular in the dormer windows, and that's not easy saying that. We're now on to Lawrence Pountney Hill, and the large building in the distance as we look down the alley is somewhere I worked for 6 years, from 2013 to 2019. But first of all, we'll take a little detour down Suffolk Lane. Now, its most notable feature is the grammar school that was founded here in 1561 when the western portion of the mansion site was bought by the Worshipful Company of Merchant Tailors. And we can now view the building in front of us where I used to work, as mentioned just a few moments ago. I've dropped in a couple of nice VR letterboxes with lips, so for those who like those sort of things, that may appeal. And this is the site of Lawrence Pountney Church and Corpus Christi College, destroyed in the Great Fire of London 1666. We've come to one of the gems of the City of London. Is this house at 7A Lawrence Pountney Hill. I featured it in a recent short calling it the Merchant House 1703, but let's do a small, and it is a very small investigation into its rich history and buildings that may have been on this site since Roman time. By 1348, the property had been acquired from Thomas de Kent by Thomas de Holden, a brewer, who then dwelt and lived in the house. Thomas de Holden died in July 1349, quite probably in the Black Death, and in August of that year his widow Alice conveyed the house to Edmund de Hingham. We mentioned that the house had been damaged in the Great Fire of London 1666, and was rebuilt by about 1675. We're estimating that because it appears on Elgeby and Morgan's map published in 1676. And the look of the house today is not too dissimilar to how it would have been rebuilt around 1670. And we know that a Samuel Clay, a gentleman merchant, occupied this house towards the end of the 17th century. I've given you an extremely brief history of this house, and if I was to go further, then there's suggestions that there may have been Roman buildings on this site, and I might come back later and do a vlog just detailing all its history in a lot more detail. We're trying to get back onto Cannon Street now via Bush Lane, and in front of us we can see the historic Bell Pub. I've been there several times, and it describes itself as the oldest small pub in the City of London. There is a roll of honour on one of the interior wall that lists every landlord since 1673. And the Bell is said to have been one of those few pubs to have survived the Great Fire of London that occurred 7 years earlier in 1666. I would highly recommend it as a place to visit, and the beer also is very good. We've crossed over the road from the Bell and we're close to St Swithin's Lane on Cannon Street, and we will now see the iconic London Stone, first recorded around the year 1100. The date and original purpose of the stone are unknown, though it's possibly of Roman origin. The present London Stone is only the upper portion of a once much larger object. The surviving portion is a block of Oolithic limestone. And before us you can see an inscription that gives you some detailed history about the London Stone and the nearby St Swithin Church that we will mention shortly. We've now made it onto the famous St Swithin Lane. That is named after Bishop Swithin, who's known for his miracles, though the only miracle mentioned is the repair of a basket of broken eggs dropped by a flustered lady. His enduring legend is apparently due to events after his death on the 2nd of July, 862. St Swithin's Day is the 15th of July, the date when he was moved to a new shrine. This date is associated with the weather forecast for the English summer. In the rhyme, St Swithin's Day, if thou dost rain, for 40 days it will remain. St Swithin's Day, if thou be fair, for 40 days 'twill rain ne'er melt. Or something like that. If the pronunciation in that end piece was awful, I apologise. A George Sandeman set up as a wine merchant in Birchin Lane in 1790, importing ports and sherries from Portugal and Spain. We mentioned and visited Birchin Lane a month or so ago when we looked at the tea and coffee trade in the City of London. His business moved to St Swithin's Lane in 1805 as the cellars were ideal for aging and storing the wines and were easily accessed by an underground passage from the Thames. Well, that sounds ideal and perfect for another vlog on this area. Mysterious underground passages from the Thames to various locations in the City of London sounds just like an ideal subject. And just a few moments ago we saw the restaurant and bar, the Don, that reopened recently after closing for 4 years. And within that fine establishment that I visited probably about 6 or 7 years ago, there are 2 additional bars, the Sandeman and Bar 1790, which we have just shown you. I would seriously recommend this place as somewhere to eat and drink, and one of the fellow Anglian flaneurs is a lover of port and sherry, so I must take him here. And a few moments when viewing the outside of the Don, you would have seen the famous Cape symbol of Sandeman Port. And St Swithin's is another fine place to eat and drink. We've now dropped in a print of the old church here, St Swithin, London Stone. The church was destroyed by the Great Fire of London in 1666 and of course rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren. It was badly damaged by bombing during the Second World War, and the remains were demolished in 1962. We've now doubled back down St Swithin's Lane and we're now back on Cannon Street at the steps of Cannon Street Station. The station was built on the site of an old medieval steel yard, the training base in England of the Hanseatic League. And I'll mention in much more detail about the Hanseatic League when I visit places like King's Lynn, which I intend to do quite shortly, and other places like Rostock and Hamburg on the North German coast. If I can put my football hat on for a few moments and do a complete, go on a complete tangent, there's a possibility that Hansa Rostock will play St Pauli, who are based in Hamburg, very shortly. Both clubs have strong affiliations. Hansa Rostock are reputedly a very right-wing team, and St Pauli, some of you may know, have strong left-wing connections. So I thought it might be interesting to do a vlog on that rivalry and derby. But apologies there, I've gone completely off the subject and I'll try and get back onto the subject of Cannon Street. I've dropped in a print of how the station looked in 1910. And as the station was built with intentions to connect to places south of the Thames, it required a new bridge across the River Thames constructed between 1863 and 1866. The station's twin brick towers were listed Grade 2 listed in 1972, and in 1986 they were restored in a project costing just under £250,000, which would be something like £3 million today. In the previous print you would have seen close to the twin towers 2 very special rooftop gardens. I've been to both and they've also been featured in Gardener's World. And that's just one of the incredible and really interesting facts that we're relating to you today. And I've been working really hard with some coaching on trying to make my voice more interesting, but I don't think it's working. And we've come across this fine statue called the Plumber's Apprentice, sculptured by Martin Jennings, unveiled in 2011 to mark the 400th anniversary of the Worshipful Company of Plumbers, whose Guildhall was demolished to make way for this station. And this is another morph we've seen a few this summer as we've done our walks through the City of London. First one we saw was in Hayes Galleria, and that was the Beefeater morph. I did a shot on this last week. It's 103 Cannon Street. I rather like the building, and on research saw that it was built in the Byzantium style. We're walking down Cousin Lane now to view the River Thames and the station towers that we mentioned a few moments ago. I've dropped in some views of the River Thames for no other reason than I like viewing the River Thames. It's got no real connection with Cannon Street other than we're very close by to the Twin Towers of Cannon Street Station. So I guess that may be reasonable enough. And I've got some mixed memories of drinking at the Banker. I might have bored you with this in a previous vlog, I think I had done, but I ended up drinking here one night, going back to Liverpool Street, missing my stop at Ipswich, and ending up in Norwich and spending the night at the Premier Inn by the River Wensum. Happy days. Once again we're back onto Cannon Street and we can see the Bloomberg building built out of Derbyshire limestone. I'm not going to talk too much about the Bloomberg building today. This is an incredibly historic site with strong Roman connections. It's old Bucklesbury House and where the Temple of Mithras was discovered. So we'll come back another day and do justice to that great subject. But whilst we're here, I can't miss out on this wonderful exhibit, the recreation of the River Walbrook and how it may have looked during Roman times. We're now walking up to the famous Nicholson's pub, the Sugarloaf. This area had strong connections with the sugar trade. In the 18th century, the area of Three Cranes Wharf, Queen Street and Upper Thames Street was home to several sugar refineries, but they were demolished for the building of Southwark Bridge in 1819. The Sugarloaf was the traditional form in which refined sugar was produced and sold until the late 19th century. A tall cone with a rounded top from which lumps could be broken off with sugar nips. We've now arrived at Mansion House Tube Station. There's lots of wonderful alleyways that branch off the tube station here, places like Garlick Hill, and we'll tackle and visit those another time. They've got many stories and well worthy of a visit and vlog. We've just shown you some views of Cannon Street in a westerly and easterly direction, and of course once again our filming has been interrupted by a London red bus, but there's no problem with that. There's no better way to end a vlog than a look at St Paul's Cathedral. So that's goodbye from the Anglican Flaneurs, and I'll leave you with this iconic view. I hope you've enjoyed this walk down Cannon Street.